Just want to make sure. Can everybody hear me? Okay. Well, I can hear me, so if you can't, you need to tell me. Because I can hear me. Alright, well, this week, guys, we're going to be in Genesis 21. And did you actually want me to tell them what you were talking about? The best Christian?
Oh, yeah. So, yeah.
Okay.
Because this is beautiful.
So, there was this Jewish comedian that I saw, and he was telling this story, and he said, basically he was walking down the streets of New York one day, and he was passing this man who was homeless, and the fella, he asked him, he's like, do you have any money? He says, sorry man, I don't have anything right now. And he just kept walking, and he said, the guy, he just yelled out after him, he says, what, are you not a good Christian? And he said, and I thought to myself, well, no, I'm not. I'm Jewish. and he was like, and Jews don't make good Christians. And he said, well, except for one. He was actually the best. He's talking about Jesus. But, yeah, I thought that was funny. So Genesis chapter 21, as Pastor Jason said, this week we're going to learn about God's promise finally comes to pass. And the very first verse, it makes me kind of chuckle because it's kind of like the big reveal. Because, we've heard over and over again, God reminded Abraham, God reminded Sarah, I'm going to give you a son with Sarah. You are going to have a child. Even at your age, that's going to happen. And we remember the story where Sarah kind of laughed in her heart, it said. And that's important because that's going to come back again whenever the son is born in this chapter. And then also, what else was there that I wanted to keep fresh in our minds? I think that was it. All right, so the very first verse. Oh, the others. Back to the first verse. So remember what the three men that visited Abraham said, and he said, remember the Lord told Abram that, this time next year you're going to have a son, and that's when Sarah chuckled in her heart. But I love so it's been a couple chapters since then. We saw all the Sodom and Gomorrah stuff. We saw that kind of back and forth, the contrast between last chapter and what happened with Sodom and Gomorrah, with Abimelech and Abraham. And now here, in chapter 21, we're going to start in verse 1. It says, and the Lord visited Sarah, as he had said, and the Lord did unto Sarah, as he had spoken. Like I said, that always makes me chuckle because we've been waiting so long for this to happen. And so, if just the big reveal is like, God did exactly what he said he was going to do. And it says in verse 2, it says, for Sarah conceived and bare Abraham a son in his old age, at the set time of which God had spoken to him. So again, that conversation they had before the Sodom and Gomorrah story. It said in verse 3, and Abraham called the name of his son that was born unto him, whom Sarah bare to him, Isaac. And Abraham circumcised his son Isaac, being 8 days old, as God had commanded him. And Abraham was 100 years old when his son Isaac was born unto him. So Abraham, he's getting on up there. He's 100 years old. Remember, this time last year, he was 99 whenever he had that conversation with the Lord, and whenever he met the three men in the desert there. And then we see that Isaac is finally born, and then he's circumcised on the 8th day, as God had commanded. Remember, that's a part of their covenant. Abraham, all the people in Abraham's community, this community, this family that God is establishing through Abraham, the male children are to be circumcised on the 8th day. So that's Abraham's side of the covenant, basically. It's the physical sign, like we had talked about, just like with the rainbow and the promise with Noah. So it's just the outward physical sign of God's promise. So verse 6. And so now that Isaac's been born, Sarah, she chimes in. It says, and Sarah said, God hath made me to laugh, so that all that hear me will laugh with me. So I like this because, again, we've been waiting so long for this promise to happen. Over and over again, we kept being reminded about it, and then it finally happens. And I love that, after waiting all this time, Sarah's now gone from being skeptical about God giving her a son with Abraham to now she's outwardly laughing. And she says, God has made me to laugh so that all that hear will laugh with me. And it seems like such a simple thing, but it's like when God fulfills promises or whenever he answers prayers, it's like the best thing we can do is express that to people. Why? Because then other people will glorify God with us and praise with us. And that's what I love about this verse is, she says, I used to laugh because I was skeptical, but now I'm laughing because now I see the truth that God keeps his promise. And she says, and now he's made me laugh, so now everyone will laugh with me. And so verse 7, it says, and she said, who would have said unto Abraham that Sarah should have given children suck? For I have borne him a son in his old age. And so, again, it's like this doesn't make any sense to me, but God kept his promise, and that's why she laughs now. So she's found joy, whereas before she was skeptical about the promise. And so verse 8, it says, and the child grew, so Isaac, now being born, it says, and the child grew and was weaned. And Abraham made a great feast the same day that Isaac was weaned. And now this is where the story takes a bit of a turn, and it brings up the other son. It says in verse 9, and Sarah saw the son of Hagar the Egyptian, which she had borne unto Abraham, mocking. So she sees Ishmael, Hagar, the son that Abraham had with Hagar, her bondservant, her bondwoman, and she sees that. So it's important to realize, so he's had Isaac now. But if you remember, Ishmael was born when he was 86. So Ishmael's at least 14 years old here. And if the child's been weaned, sure that takes a couple years probably itself. So Ishmael's probably like upper teens at least, you would think. And so he's literally mocking this young child. And for most people that sounds kind of cruel. But I grew up with 2 older brothers. I got mocked all the time.
Amen.
That's what older brothers do. But a lot of times we read this and we just, it sounds crazy. But again, so Ishmael, upper teens, this younger boy, Isaac. Sarah sees Ishmael mocking Isaac. And it says in verse 10, it says, wherefore, so what does Sarah do? It says, wherefore she said unto Abraham, cast out this bondwoman and her son, for the son of this bondwoman shall not be heir with my son, even with Isaac. And so you need to send them away because they're not getting any inheritance with my boy. And verse 11, it says, and so basically Sarah goes into mama bear mode. That's what I call it. It's like nobody's going to be picking on my baby. And so verse 10, so we read verse 10. So she sees Ishmael mocking Isaac. She tells Abraham, you need to get rid of them, send them off somewhere because they're not going to be heirs with my son. And in other words, they're not going to inherit what my son's supposed to inherit. So verse 11, it says, and the thing was very grievous in Abraham's sight because of his son. And this is important because I think a lot of times we hear bondwoman and her son and all these things, but remember, Abraham's always been very partial towards Ishmael. Remember, he asked God, why don't you give the promise to him? Because Sarah, she's beyond childbearing, she's barren, and you know what? Why don't you just give your promise to Ishmael instead? And God said, no, you're going to have a child with Sarah. And so he's always loved Ishmael. And so verse 11, it says, and so whenever Sarah brings this up, Abraham, he's kind of in a tough spot. You just expect me to send my firstborn son away after all this time. And so verse 12, it says, and God said unto Abraham, let it not be grievous in thy sight because of the lad, and because of thy bondwoman. And all that Sarah hath said unto thee, hearken unto her voice. For in Isaac shall thy seed be called. So God reminds him, hey, remember the promise. And remember, I told you it would be through Isaac. And he says, but don't let it trouble you. Why? Because in verse 13 he goes on, he says, and also of the son of the bondwoman will I make a nation, because he is thy seed. And so God says, basically he's going to place his mercy upon Ishmael, even though he's not inheriting that promise like Isaac's supposed to in making this great nation out of Abraham. He still is going to be blessed by God. And so, why? Because he is Abraham's son. And God tells him that. He's like, you don't have to be worried, because I'm going to bless him, because he is your son. And so verse 14, it says, and Abraham rose up early in the morning. And this is really important, and this is why I brought up Ishmael's age when we're about to read this story here. So verse 14, and Abraham rose up early in the morning and took bread and a bottle of water and gave it unto Hagar, so Ishmael's mother, putting it on her shoulder and the child, and sent her away. And she departed and wandered in the wilderness of Beersheba. And so Abraham, he listens to God, he listens to Sarah, he sends them away. But again, you see Abraham being a good dad, as it were. He gives them food, he gives them water, and then he sends them away. And so then it says that they wander in the wilderness, so basically the desert. So verse 15 it says, and the water was spent in the bottle, and she cast the child under one of the shrubs. So again, remember, this is not a baby that she's just tossing under a bush. This is like a pretty almost adult child. And so it seems like they've been wandering for a while if he can't go on, basically. And so basically she sits him in the shade of a bush, and then she separates from him. It says in verse 16, so it says she cast the child under one of the shrubs. In verse 16 it says, and she went and sat her down over against him a good way off. And remember, over against means basically opposite, across from each other. And it says a good way off, so she's pretty good ways away from him. And it says as it were a bow shot, so pretty good distance. I mean, I've seen some pretty crazy bow shots, so it must be pretty far. And it says, verse 16, it says, and she sat again, and she went and sat her down over against him a good way off, as it were a bow shot. For she said, let me not see the death of the child. And she sat over against him and lifted up her voice and wept. And so Isaac, obviously, he's going to live. But the bondwoman, now being sent away with Ishmael, her son is now going to die, she thinks. And so the best thing she knows to do is, I can't watch that happen. And so she separates from him, and she says this, and she weeps. But then verse 17 it says, and God heard the voice of the lad, and the angel of God called to Hagar out of heaven, and said unto her, what aileth thee, Hagar? Fear not, for God hath heard the voice of the lad where he is. And again, this is a very similar story to what happened when she ran away from Sarah the first time. But here, again, God reaches out to her in mercy, or the angel of God calls out to her, and then it says, he says, what aileth thee, Hagar? Fear not, for God hath heard the voice of the lad where he is. In verse 18 he says, arise, lift up the lad, and hold him in thine hand, for I will make him a great nation. And I love this next verse. It says, and God opened her eyes, and she saw a well of water, and she went and filled the bottle with water and gave the lad drink. And so God, he steps in, keeps his promise to Abraham again, and he keeps his promise to Hagar here, that he had told her, he's, as long as you listen to me, your son will be blessed. He may not get the same blessing that Isaac gets, but he will be blessed. And then it says, verse 20, and God was with the lad, and he grew, and dwelt in the wilderness, and became an archer. So he was a hunter. It says, and he dwelt in the wilderness of Paran, and his mother took him a wife out of the land of Egypt. And so that kind of finishes up this half of the story. So Ishmael has been sent away with Hagar, but we see that Ishmael's got a future ahead of him. And why? Because of God's promises to Abraham. And he'll probably get into that, but you have fun, okay?
I do have fun.
I know. And so, verse 22. Now we kind of jump back to Abraham and Sarah, or Abraham more specifically. So we go back to Abraham, verse 22, and it says, "And it came to pass at that time that Abimelech," remember this Philistine king, that allowed Abraham to dwell in his land wherever he wanted after the whole Sarah debacle again. It says, "And it came to pass at that time that Abimelech and Phicol, the chief captain of his host," so basically the leader of his army, "spake unto Abraham, saying, God is with thee in all that thou doest." And so Abimelech comes to Abraham and says, "I know that God is with you." And then he says this. He says, "Now therefore," verse 23, "swear unto me here by God that thou wilt not deal falsely with me, nor with my son, nor with my son's son, but according to the kindness that I have done unto thee, thou shalt do unto me, and to the land wherein thou hast sojourned." And Abraham said, "I will swear." So Abimelech says, I know that God is with you. Because remember, Abimelech had that dream where God spoke to him. He says, "I know that God's with you. All I would like is for you to basically make peace with me. Let's make an arrangement here where, we're always going to be kind to one another, basically. We're always going to have peace with each other. You're not going to lie to me. I'm not going to deal falsely with you. All those things." He says, "Nor with me, nor my son, nor my son's son." In other words, I want this to be a long-lasting peace between us because I know that God is with you. And Abraham, in his infinite wisdom, he says, "I'll swear that." That's not really a promise that he's able to keep. But that's another Bible study down the line. But Abraham, he says, "You know what? I agree to that. Let's keep the peace between us." And so verse 25, it says, and I love this. This peace treaty doesn't start off great. So this treaty between Abimelech and Abraham, we're going to have long-term peace between us. The very next verse, Abraham says, "You know what? That sounds like a great idea." And then verse 25, "And Abraham reproved Abimelech because of a well of water, which Abimelech's servants had violently taken away." And so, clearly there's still some hostility between the two. And Abraham's like, you know what? I want peace too. But so there's this well that your guys have stolen basically from my people. And so verse 26, and remember, wells are a big deal. So Hagar, her eyes were just open to a well when she was out in the desert. And that was her salvation. She was saved in that moment. She was able to survive in the wilderness because God blessed her. Here, Abraham says, your guys kind of took away one of our wells. And so what happens next? It says in verse 26, "And Abimelech said, I wot not, or I know not, who hath done this thing. Neither didst thou tell me. Neither yet heard I of it, but today." So Abimelech says, this is the first I'm hearing about this. You didn't even tell me about this until today. And he says, so verse 27, it says, "And Abraham took sheep and oxen, and gave them unto Abimelech, and both of them made a covenant. And Abraham set 7 ewe lambs of the flock by themselves. And Abimelech said unto Abraham, What mean these 7 ewe lambs which thou hast set by themselves?" So this is another covenant ritual. We've talked a little bit about that stuff before. So here, this ritual takes place basically, and Abraham, he's making this covenant with Abimelech. He brings out these 7 lambs, and Abimelech says, "Hey, what's with the lambs?" And then it says, verse 30, it says, "And he said," so Abraham, he responds, he says, "For these 7 ewe lambs shalt thou take of my hand, and they may be a witness unto me that I have digged this well." In other words, your men, they took away our well. I'm going to give you these 7 lambs, and that It's basically the agreement between us that this is always going to be my well. And he says, because I dug it. So verse 31, can you dig it? Sorry, couldn't help myself. So, he likes that kind of stuff.
Yeah. That's right. That's good stuff right there.
Assistant pastor's job is just to make the lead pastor laugh. That's kind of what we're here for. So verse 31, it says, wherefore he called that place Beersheba, because there they swear, both of them. So it's interesting. It's funny that when Hagar and Ishmael were sent away, where did they find themselves at? The wilderness of Beersheba. And then here, and what did she see? A well. And so this life-saving resource out in the desert, basically, that saved her and Ishmael. Here, Abraham says, I got this well over here in Beersheba that your men took from me. And so, you know what? I'd like to give you these 7 lambs. You let me have my lamb, and that's always going to be our agreement. This is my well now, because I'm the one that dug it. And so what did they say? It says, because wherefore he calleth that place Beersheba, because they that swear, there they swear, both of them. Thus, verse 32, they made a covenant at Beersheba. Then Abimelech rose up, and Phicol the chief captain of his host, and they returned into the land of the Philistines. And Abraham planted a grove in Beersheba, and called there on the name of the Lord, the everlasting God. And Abraham sojourned in the Philistines' land many days. So I love the end of this chapter, because when you think about, so Abraham, after all this, remember Abimelech already said, you can dwell in my land anywhere you want, take whatever places that you want. Then they have this kind of little spat over this well, and they settle it, and then Abraham literally puts down roots. He plants a garden, basically. He plants a grove, it says. He planted a grove in Beersheba. And I love that, because if you think about it, this, again, it goes all the way back to Noah's story, where, he's made peace with his enemies. And Noah's story, all of the evil and the wicked people had been washed away in the flood. Here, so Noah, he gets off the boat, and what's the first thing he did? He planted a vineyard. He put down roots. He established a home, basically. And that's what Abraham is doing here. He's like, they've let me live in this country now, and you know what? He told me I could live wherever I wanted to. Now that I have peace with him, this is where I'm going to choose. This is where I'm going to put down roots, basically. And so he plants a garden, just like Noah did, basically. And then it says, and he sojourned in the Philistines' land many days. And again, it points out that this is still the Philistines' land. And that's important because, again, we've seen the fulfillment of the Son, but we haven't seen the fulfillment of God giving the land to Abraham yet. And so it reminds us, there's still another part of the promise that has to be fulfilled. But we've seen part of it. There's a big build-up. We saw God kept that part. And, we saw Sarah go from skeptical to believing and laughing now with joy because, now she realizes the Lord keeps his promises. And so when it leaves us hanging there on this cliffhanger at the end of this, the real question we're supposed to ask, okay, well, he's fulfilled the first half of the promises. Now we're just waiting for that second half. And that plays big into things we believe in as Christians with some of God's promises. He's fulfilled a lot of his promises, but there's still a few that we're still waiting on. And that's a big thing. And I think you see the little sprinklings of that throughout this chapter. And like I said, and that's the big question it leaves us with, okay, well, Abraham has a son now, but when does he inherit the land? And so that's where we're left with. And that's where we'll pick up next week, guys.
Yeah, next week. Take it back. Shalom.
I said so long.
Hey, throw me that marker up here. Throw me that marker up here.
Okay.
So, it's something that we got to look at here. I should have done this before, and I'm not that great at the map. So I'm going to kind of do this just so you can just kind of look at it. So if you think about, I don't know if you can even see over there. So if you think about, you got yourself, let's just say kind of like Africa, all right? So there's Africa, all right? Doesn't really look like Africa.
Nice Africa.
So let me not do Africa. Let's just do, let's do like the Mediterranean, okay? Here's the Mediterranean, all right? So there we go, there's the Mediterranean. So there's your water, right? So basically everything up here would be Europe, okay? So this is Europe. Okay, so you got Europe there. And so down here, you pretty much got Africa, all right? So you got Africa right here. And so what you got here is basically the desert. So this would be Africa. And so Africa, what do you got there? You got Egypt. So you got Egypt. Okay, there we go, Egypt. So you got Egypt, you got the Mediterranean, you got Europe, and then basically you got what would be the desert? So Saudi Arabia. So this would be Saudi Arabia. See this, the Arabia. So Saudi Arabia, and then you got this the river, and then you got the Red Sea. So you got the Red Sea would be right through here, and so basically you've got this little tiny land here, which would be Israel pretty much, and then you got like Turkey, and then way over here you've got Iran and Iraq and Assyrian Empire, the Medo-Persian Empire. So basically everything over this way, you got China, and you got all of those places out that way. So the Far East, if anybody is going to travel from the east to the center of the world, eventually will be pretty much Egypt, if you are thinking about it, because eventually we'll get there to where Egypt, you got the Great Pyramids, and you got all of the Pharaoh, and you got all this stuff. So basically, in order for anybody to get anywhere from Egypt to Europe or to Asia, because America's on the other side of the planet, nobody have ever, they hadn't got there. And so the idea is, in order for anybody to get anywhere, they have to go through Israel. You see, that's the only way, because there's mountains here. There's mountains here, there's the Jordan River and the Dead Sea, and that goes all the way. And so basically the only way, and there's mountains all around through here, and the only way to get there is through this way. Why? Because you can't go through the desert. You're pretty much going to die. Why? Because there's no water. You can't go over the mountains. Why? Because there's no water. And so everybody's got to go through Israel. And so it's like the centermost focus point ever. And so what happens is what you're seeing here in this chapter is Abraham digs a well. You see, because there's no water. Because the Dead Sea is dead. I mean, it's salt. You can't drink it. So he digs this well, and now in chapter 26, we'll eventually get there. He starts digging wells everywhere. And so now, like literally, this is like the place to where anybody who's traveling has to go through Israel. That's why it's still important today. In fact, if you think about it, they're trying to put ports over here to where they can get through here. Think about the Middle East right now. They're arguing over the Strait of Hormuz. Because why? They're trying to get all this oil to get to the rest of the world. And where's that coming from? Right here in the Middle East. That's why eventually America was trying to put a port over here on the Mediterranean. Because they're trying to pump oil eventually that way. And I know it's weird, but I just wanted us to all think about the significance of this well. The reason why the well is there is because you got to have water. And then, as John mentioned at the tail end of this, what did he do with all that water from that well? He planted a garden. And so he started, really producing his own garden from there. So if you think about...
most cities call it beautification.
Yeah, there you go.
Started making the land look real pretty.
Yeah, that's right. And so the idea is eventually my map will look a little bit better next time. I'll be a little bit more prepared. So, but if we want to think about kind of like today, if you remember, if you remember the significance of this, and this is it pretty much for Isaac. There's a couple little places to where Isaac and the Ishmaelites and things come in.
About 2 chapters for Isaac.
Yeah, and that's just about, or Ishmael. Yeah, that's just about it for Ishmael.
Oh, Ishmael.
I'm sorry, for Ishmael. This is just about it.
Get
I'm
like one more reference
Yeah.
about him.
Yeah. So Ishmael, this is pretty much it. But I want us to think about the significance of Ishmael. God actually spoke to her twice. This is the second time. The first time, he goes and talks to her and says, you go back and stay with Abraham. Remember? And so, and then after God, in the form of the angel of the Lord, and therefore we look at this in this chapter, it's the same thing. God comes and talks to her in the form of the angel of the Lord. So God, making himself into an angel, talks to her and says, hey, I'm going to save your life. Literally, I'm going to save your child's life. And so if you think about it, God really does care. And you're like, he cares for who? It's not so much that he cares for the Ishmaelites and all of their descendants. It's that he actually cares for Abraham's son. Because think of it, literally in the New Testament, in the book of Hebrews, it literally makes it abundantly clear that Abraham's faith in trusting God to actually get up and go and do what God told him to was counted unto him as righteousness. Meaning Abraham had faith that God was going to see him through and that God was going to make everything good in his life. So Abraham was willing to follow God. So now God, in turn, God blesses Abraham because Abraham had faith in him. The same principle goes for us today. See, God is saying, will you follow me? So therefore, that's kind of what we do here. We try to learn all about God so that we kind of know the character of God, so that we know what direction in life that we need to travel. So by us following God, God promises us at the end of your journey, you're going to receive a wonderful blessing, right? So right now, if you follow God, at the end of your journey, whenever you're like older than Abraham, and then eventually you're sitting down in that wonderful old folks home, and you finally close your eyes for the last time, well, that's the end of your journey that God allowed you to participate in by following God. Then God is going to allow you to cross over into a land, a promised land. Heaven. It's the same principle. So at the very beginning of Scripture, God is showing us what we need to do. Now, in turn, since Abraham was following God's direction, even though Abraham fouls up along the way, none of you would ever mess up along the way. I say that in jest. I'm assuming that maybe one of you might have made a mistake along the way. And so even though we mess up along the way, see, what we're trying to do is instill upon our family and those around us that know we're following the Lord. We might not be perfect, but we're following the Lord. So now the same principle goes for Abraham and his children, Ishmael and Isaac. He's trying to raise up this child, say, hey, we're following the Lord's direction. That's why we're actually here in this foreign land, because if you remember, see, Abraham was way down here. Abraham was way down here when God told him, hey, I want you to go all the way around these mountains, all the way across the Jordan, go all the way down into Israel, into this land to where nobody knows anybody. And then eventually there was that famine, so then where does he go? He goes down all the way to Africa into Egypt, and then what does he do? He gets a whole bunch of cattle out there. And then he goes all the way back now, and then he bumps into this King Abimelech, tries the same trick, gets a whole bunch more property, and then now he's over in this area, way down in here, which is where Beersheba is, down here at the bottom, which is kind of close to, which would be I know, I'm looking at this map because I know what I'm looking at here. See, this would be the Dead Sea, so therefore you would have Sodom and Gomorrah would be kind of over here. So anyway, in my mind. So the idea is that's where he's at. He's down here in this area. And so therefore, what happened was in the story that John had mentioned, you see, if you remember, let's just look here just real quick at this verse. We're at chapter 21. And so just flip back to 20, and just so that way you can remember this. You remember in verse 14, so chapter 20, verse 14. So Abimelech took sheep and oxen and men servants and women servants and gave them unto Abraham and restored him Sarah his wife. Because you remember, he said, hey, that's my sister. So that's the king of Palestine. So all that kind of area over there, a little bit farther probably to the closer to the Mediterranean. And so he says, hey, he's like, hey, God, and see, God actually came and told Abimelech that if you don't give him his wife back, then and if Abraham will actually pray and ask me to forgive you, then I'm going to bless you and not curse you and kill you. So he's like, oh, so he says, hey, take all my sheep, take a bunch of cattle, take a bunch of men servants to go. Basically, when it says men and women servants, we're like, oh, so these are people in chains and they're slaves. No, it's basically people to watch and man the cattle. Like, these are your herdsmen. Like, since you're going to get all this cattle and you're going to get all this stuff, you need a couple of cowboys. And so therefore, here's you a couple of cowboys to go and work the field and everything else, and they'll take care. And so he gets all that and Sarah. But then verse 15 says this, and Abimelech said, behold, what? My land is before thee, dwell where it pleaseth thee. So now he's like saying, now here, you can have all this property. And so basically, so you can have all the cattle and you can have all the people to take care of the cattle and to take care of you and to take care of whatever. And then also you can have all this property. So that's what causes the land dispute, you see. Because you remember, so now, like John said, it was perfect because we can all understand. You got the teenage son from a different lady, and he's kind of making fun of the little baby, like stupid little baby. He's like, Mama comes in, ain't nobody call nobody's gonna call Isaac stupid.
Not my baby.
So not, yeah, that's not. So anyway, so this ain't happening, and you got to do it with the left hand. Does this? That ain't happening. And so then it puts Abraham in a bad spot, right? It's like, man, I got to tell the teenage boy it's time to go. You know, it's time to be a man. It's time for you to go on it. So basically, he literally sends her away, and he's like, man, he's like, I hate this, but here's just some provisions. Go out there. So as she's going along, and from the way we understand it, that well was probably dug by perhaps Abraham's men servants and his people. He's like, hey man, let's go. We need some water out there. Probably because they had cattle. We're just putting two and two together. Because she had no idea that there was a well out there. In fact, she was literally going to die. She was going to die because she had no water to drink. She was going to let the baby go die because the baby hasn't had anything to drink either. She literally left the baby there in the woods because she just couldn't handle the baby starving to death, or dying of thirst. And so literally she goes back to let the baby die. The baby's crying, or baby's whatever. It's not baby. By now he's a teenager, but
he's almost a grown man.
He's almost a full grown man, almost like me. And so basically he's dying of thirst, and so the person's dying of thirst. God hears them and then goes there and says, hey, you know what? You go back there and I'm going to show you that there's a well here. So she finds this well, probably not even really realizing what's going on. It could be the same well. I'm pretty sure it could be. Maybe not. Who knows? But the idea is, see, Abraham was basically making all of these fresh water wells because he had all of these cattle. He was in business. And so therefore, all of these wells come into play throughout the rest of history. Because all of history, that's why everybody, that's the only way to get to Africa. That's the only way to get to Africa is that way. So everybody who goes to Egypt and everybody who wants to conquer Egypt, all the way to like Alexander the Great, the Romans, whatever. That's the only way to get there to the Mediterranean. Even today, that's why they have the oil there, and that's why they're still fighting over that property. So the wells were important. So now they have this well, and this starts that dispute. The well saves their life, and saves their family and their future. And then Abimelech comes in, and they say, hey, make this promise. And basically what it is it's whenever it comes to the sheep, like I'm going to give you all these sheep, and then you're going to make sure that, hey, we go ahead and this well is my well since we're arguing over it. Is this your property? Is it our property? Who dug the well? We dug the well. Well, your people say that this is their well, but it's not their well. This is our well. And so here's what we're going to do. We're just going to settle out of court, meaning this well is worth these many sheep. You can have them, and therefore we're going to make it all deal. You get this, we get this, and then I'm not going to pray that God strike you dead, Abimelech. And so Abimelech says, hey, good for me. And good for me. And so that's kind of what all that's about.
But the most frustrating thing is they agreed for this to be a multi-generational peace.
Yeah.
It's like, you know what, your sons can't be mean to my sons.
Yeah, and that never works out. In fact, we can look at that same type of peace treaty every single day with Iran. Yeah, we got a peace treaty. Yeah, 3 hours ago, 36 minutes ago. It's like not everybody wants to. So it's the same principle that's going on there. And so we're setting this whole thing up to be one of the most dramatic and traumatic things in Scripture that from here all the way to Jesus, next chapter. Like literally next week. Like I almost want to make sure I'm going to drive I'm kind of like you from whenever you drove all the way from Atlanta all the way here just to get to church. Like I'm going to be booking 90 from Cleveland all the way to get here just for. No, I've read verse 20. I've read chapter 22 and I got it, so it's good. You're in good hands. But I'm just saying this is traumatic. Like you're saying, what in the world? Like you'll be saying that next week. Like what in the world? Who would ever do that? Who would ever say that? But if John, my young Padawan here, I trained you well, my son. And if he works this together, you're going to be able to see Jesus in this whole thing. And it's going to be one of the most miraculous things ever, even though it's very difficult to look at. So, all right. So, any questions there? I mean, it was pretty.
I do have a question.
Yes.